Hey, this is Todd. Wanted to spend a few minutes talking about lore. I've actually made a video about being a flexible world builder. If I can remember, I'll put the link in the show notes, or maybe it'll pop up in the video. Oftentimes I forget those, but if I can remember, that's where it will be. Otherwise, you can look it up on the channel. The idea behind that was to not become fixated on particular paths, particular world building background that you've done, to the point that it begins to constrict your freedom and your players' freedom as the DMs. In some ways, this is a follow-up to that, or perhaps a little bit of a reimagining. I wanted to give some specific tips, maybe do's and don'ts sort of things, but mostly really more do's, about lore and about world building and about making it so that it's something that is good and useful, not just for you, but for the game. And I think sometimes when we run afoul of lore, it's because it's become something that's great for us personally, the world building, something that a lot of us GMs have a lot of fun doing, but that, as far as our game goes, actually can become a detriment. When we think about backgrounds for PCs, we think about, players are creating this lore, this backstory for their characters. And I've talked about backstory before and my sort of love-hate, like-dislike relationship with it, because the backstory often comes with a lot of baggage that can, rather than opening things up for the game, can constrict things down. In the same way, when you are world building, that's kind of the GM's backstory, right? It's the backstory for the world, it's this lore, and there is a lot of great things and possibilities that come with it, and it can really add, obviously, that uniqueness from our games. If you're playing, by the book, vanilla D&D, it's easy to fall into the trap of everything seeming the same. Everybody's got elves and dwarves and humans and whatnot, and they all have a certain amount of magic and all this and that, and that. Your world building, your lore, is going to separate your world from my world from anyone else's world. So that is great. But you can also reach a point not only of diminishing returns and what you're actually getting for that world building, besides obviously the joy of just world building, but then it can actually begin to be a detriment. What do I mean by that? Okay, so let's take a situation. As usual, a lot of my inspiration for making these videos comes from things I see GMs reaching out on social media and the internet and various forums for help. This GM had put their PCs, their party was entering this place, a little bit of a dungeon crawl. He was looking for, hey, I need a boss for this dungeon. What can I use? So I see myself and some others, I think that's actually just me, maybe in this case, asking questions about it. And they were pulling out all this stuff, all this lore, all this background that they made, but it wasn't helping them. The reason why they were asking for help is because they'd kind of written themselves into a corner. They couldn't do this because of this part of their world building. They couldn't do this other thing because of this part of their world building. It couldn't be this. It couldn't be that. It couldn't be that. And that's why they're reaching for help. They needed something really outside the box because everything inside the box they had covered up. So I would say my first do of lore, of world building, is do think of everything you're world building as potential. What do I mean by potential? In this case, and in a lot of cases, the world building that we as GMs get hung up on, that we want to make sure that we're honoring and we want to make sure that we're following and that really trap us and constrict our choices, is stuff that the PCs have never seen, they've never experienced. As far as the actual story being told at the table, the game, none of it has come into play. So you have all this background stuff, and then you have what's actually happened. So if you think about the actualized story is the stuff that's come out of the table one way or another. PCs have heard a story, then that story becomes locked in. They've experienced the effects of something, that becomes locked in. They've talked to somebody, they've gone to a kingdom, that kingdom's locked in. Outside of that bubble, you have all this almost quantum cloud of possible things happening. And that's where your world building lies. And it stays in this quantum, probable, potential cloud until it actually comes out of your mouth, comes out of an NPC. Obviously, your mouth via an NPC, via exposition, via a treasure map, via a scrap of a book that someone's found in your gaming session. The practical point of this is that don't feel trapped or held by the stuff in that potential cloud. If none of the players know about it, hasn't come out the table, then it doesn't really exist yet. I mean, and I think this is really a key concept. It's really what I spent a lot of other video going on. So I'm going to maybe go a little bit more into this because I think it's really important. The only things that really exist in your world are the stuff that's come out at the table. You can have great ideas for stuff. There are tons of amazing ideas. You can have amazing things. You can have amazing things underpinning your world. But they should all be malleable, changeable. You should be able to take them. You should be able to twist them to fit the game, because really the game is the thing. The stuff that we're doing at the table with our players when we're sitting down to play D&D, whether it's virtual or in person, that's the real thing. That's the history being written. Everything else is just possibilities, probabilities. But as GMs, obviously, we get hung up, and it can be important to remember that. And I remember when I told that GM, I said, hey, you've got some really interesting story here, but it's just trapping you. You can't use magic because of this. You can't use these guys because of that. Can't be this because of that. Why don't you just change some of those? I said, has any of the players, has any of this come out at the table? No, it hasn't. So why don't you just change it? Well, that's advice I give to other people, but I really, for myself, I like to stick to the lore. Well, sometimes you got to take your own advice. If it's good enough advice for you to give to other people, it's good enough for you to use yourself. And if you ever see me, if I'm ever going over what's happening in my campaign and you see that I'm just have my party or my own thinking trapped by my own backstory that only I know, let me know on it. I mean, a good example of this is Tolkien, right? You have all these letters and all these books and all these drafts of stuff that could have been in Lord of the Rings, but all we get is Lord of the Rings. And through his whole life, he was kind of tinkering with some of these things, and they didn't really have any import on the story. They were just stuff in the background. We know about all this stuff only because posthumously all this material was released. Otherwise, all that stuff would have just been potential. The only stuff that we really would know was the stuff that was in The Hobbit and in The Lord of the Rings. Everything else was basically unfinished or manuscripts that was published afterwards. So if you think of your world building, that's all that manuscript stuff. The stuff that actually services to your players, that's The Lord of the Rings, that's the Hobbit. The point is, the reason why I'm driving this home is because it's easy to sit down and it's easy to fall in love with our lore and say, oh, all this and that, and some of it's going to be great, and some of it's going to be not so great. We can go down all kinds of rabbit holes, but then we're locked in. If we just say that whatever we've written on that paper is it, and we can't change anything, then we're shortchanging ourselves as creators, because I come up with great ideas all the time. Personally, I'm sure you do too. And if I had said that, well, any ideas that come up on Tuesday can't work because of something I wrote down on Monday, even though none of it's actually happened yet, I'm just trapping myself. Your players will also come up with great ideas. You want to put yourself in a position to leverage them and use them, and not to say like, oh man, that's a great idea, but I can't do it because 6 months ago I wrote down in this notebook, blah, blah, blah. And even though no one's been to blah, blah, blah yet or seen blah, blah, blah yet, I'm holding by it because darn it, I wrote it down. I wrote it in pen. So number one do is look at everything as potential. Obviously, number one don't think of yourself. Think of everything you've written down as basically written in pen, at least metaphorically speaking. Everything is changeable. If it hasn't come out of somebody's mouth, then it can be changed. Heck, I would argue even if it did come out of somebody's mouth, it can be changed. It's not like everybody gets history right all the time. It's not like there aren't tons of, if we think of our own history, how many things do we know? We don't know exactly what happened, and it could have been one way, and it could have been another way, it could have been a third way, right? There's no reason why just because a person said something, if a better idea comes along, hey, that person was wrong. Maybe there's the odd thing where it's like, well, I can't be wrong because the cleric communed with their god, and their god literally told him A equals B. Okay, so fine. So maybe you say, okay, that's locked in. Or maybe you say, no, wait a minute. What if some trickster was in there? What if some other thing was clouding it and they guessed wrong? What if they guessed, well, they told them it was wrong on purpose because the god has a higher plan and they need the PC to believe A equals B, but in reality, A equals C. And we'll figure this out down the way, and it'll, maybe it'll be a great aha moment, right? Tons of possibilities. So maybe if I would make this a pithy do or don't, it's don't think of things as absolutes. Nothing is absolute. Nothing is always this. Nothing is always that. Nothing is always correct. Nothing is always incorrect. Think of all the fluctuations we have in our own history books. If you pick up a history book from 100 years ago and then you pick up one that was published yesterday, you can see all the differences of things we do. And it's not even to say that the one from 100 years ago is necessarily wrong and the one from now is necessarily correct. You can see that things change, evidence comes, evidence is debunked, new ideas arise, old ideas lose favor, but it doesn't even mean necessarily that old ideas are wrong, because nobody was back then, so nobody really knows. We're all dealing with fragments, and I think in your world, same thing. People are trying to write books and tell stories and pass along knowledge, but it gets fragmented, it gets mixed up. Right? There are all kinds of reasons why people don't know everything. The other part of being an absolute, and I can almost put this as a do or don't, number 3, is get rid of the word always from your world building, or never. This came up in that same conversation. Why is this thing like this? Because these people do that. Always. Do they have to do that? Yes, they have to. They would never do this other thing. Really, never? Under no circumstances might they do something else. Even if that something else is so much better for your game, you would never just say, well, maybe I can come up with a reason why they might break their rule. Nobody sticks to rules all the time. No, you can't look and say, well, they always did this 100% of the time. No, you can almost always, I would say always, find some exception. The one time that the Romans did this instead of that. The one time these guys did something else. The one time this happened instead of that. Of course, there are always one-offs. There are always opportunities. And those, you go from something being an absolute where 100% of the time where you're locked in to saying, well, most of the time they're going to do that. But if I need them to do something else, if it makes sense because of what's happening in the game that something else happened, that's just a driver for me. That's like one of those things that's going to start my imagination engine, because that gets my brain cooking. Okay, so usually they wouldn't do that. But this time they did. So why did they do that? It's the same argument I make for why I really like random tables and rolling dice and things, because you get those weird situations where you think, oh, 99% of the time it's going to be this, but I rolled the one number that gives me something different. So now I got to think about, why is that different thing happening? It's the same thing with your world building. If you run into a situation and you go, ooh, this would be really, really cool, or the players come to something really cool, but I know it would be cool, but they wouldn't normally do that. Well, maybe I'll go with the cool thing. It's like rule of cool for a world building, right? Maybe I'll go with the cool thing, and now I just need to figure out how you would get them to do that. There was a Chinese movie. I think it's one of those ones where it was, I forget what it was called, but it had all these things, these people showing up to fight some kind of united force, and it had, I don't know, Romans from Rome showed up, and all these, I think John Cusack was a Roman general, something like that, right? And you think about, just whatever, it's a goofy idea, it's a goofy concept, but just what a fun one, right? Why, the Romans are showing up in China to do something or other. You just think like, wow, like they never did that, they never, whatever, but what if they did, right? So you think about what would the steps would have been like to get a Roman legions from, the Mediterranean to march all the way to the borders of China to do X, Y, or Z, right? That's great. I mean, you think about it and you go, I don't know why they would do this, but now let me think about it. Let me come up with reasons why they would do that. Maybe an oracle said something. Maybe they got a message that was important. Like, I don't know. Maybe they had relations with China, some kind of secret alliance that happened somehow. Who knows? I don't know. That's the fun, to me, that's the fun part of the world building. You end up in the situations that you have to make sense of, and now it's up to you to use your imagination to make sense of them. Instead of just saying, well, as fun as an idea that is, I got to go with this one because A equals B equals C. So I just want to wrap these 3. I don't even know if I have another one. I wrote down a couple of them, but I feel like I've kind of floated in and out. So the first one is, be flexible. Everything is potential. Treat everything as potential until it comes out of the table. Nothing is real until it arrives at the table. Number 2, number 2 and number 3 was, I guess they're all, I think, of equal importance, right? So don't speak in absolutes. There should always be a chance for something else to happen. If you ever see yourself saying this could never happen or this would always be happen, then rethink that. Come up with exceptions and use your imagination to think out why are there exceptions. I think the third one, again, it's related. It's, nothing's written in pen. Everything is changeable. If the first part was, hey, when you're writing it down, nothing's real till it hits the table, even after that point, and this, they all work together, right? Even after that point, A, there could be exceptions to whatever rules you set up. B, those people could be wrong. If you need to go another direction, then we just say, hey, that guy was wrong, either a little bit or a lot. And that happens. People are wrong about stuff all the time. It was a mistranslation. They were reading a fragment and they were missing the piece that kind of changes the whole thing, right? It was written in some kind of cipher, and you read one part, but the cipher underneath was supposed to say something else. Somebody misled you on purpose. Maybe there's something else, even if it was using a spell, maybe there was something else divine or infernal that was twisting things around. Always give yourself room, to operate. And then the next one I would say is listen to your players. A lot of times, and you'll hear this a lot from GMs, a lot of times the best ideas come from your players. So what do you have to do? You have to listen to them, and you have to leave space in your lore for them to fill in the details. And this also is good for you to fill in the details over time, right? So we've said, okay, everything's potential, nothing is absolutes, nothing's written in pen. Leave spaces for stuff. Leave spaces for discovery. Leave spaces open there where you don't know what's there. When I was talking to this guy about his dungeon he was trying to find a boss for, he had all this minutia written down, or at least that he was typing out to me. And like this little minutia, maybe it's good for them, and I'm sure a lot of times we get comfortable. It makes us feel better to know all these little bits. But all those little bits were where they were just chains, just locking it in, locking it in, locking it in. They always do this, and they always do these three things, and so they can never do something else, and they can never do something else other than going A, B, C. If A happens, they will always do B, and then they will always do C, because that's how it is. Leave some room, because you'll be playing at the table, you'll be talking about something, and one of your players will say something. Oh, well, maybe they did this. And you're going to sit back and go, oh, that's a great idea. I wish I had that idea. What you want to be able to say is, that's a great idea. I am stealing that idea. They're going to think that they figured me out, in which case, but really it was that I am stealing from them because that's a great idea. What you don't want to be thinking is, that's a great idea. Too bad it's wrong because this stuff I wrote down the other way that frankly isn't as good, and now I'm thinking about it kind of stinks, but I feel like I got to follow it anyway. Listen to your players, leave yourself room open for those, and you're going to come up with great ideas too. Maybe you don't love that player's idea all the way, but it gives you another idea. It happens a lot. Player will say something, and maybe I don't love that idea, but I go, all of a sudden, ooh, oh my gosh, man, wouldn't it be great if, okay, that's not quite it, but this other idea that I wouldn't have gotten if they hadn't said something is amazing. That's what it's going to be. And I'm going to write that down now. You want to leave yourself space for all those discoveries. And I think from what I was trying to do, really, when you think about it, is in some ways, really in most ways, right, I am just parroting what I said in other video, because all these things add up to be flexible. Don't lock yourself down. Don't take away all the air. Take away all the air in your world building. Leave those gaps. And it can be difficult. I know it can be tough. I think it really depends on your style of GMing. Some GMs, I'm fairly comfortable doing the kind of improv game, but not everybody likes that. And I know for me, when I'm improving, what helps me is when I have a lot of knowledge, even if it's not written down, about how I feel like the game works. It's kind of like if you've ever sat with your friends and you've talked about comic books and you've made up situations in the comic books, and you guys can just talk about it because you understand the world of the comics so well. You have such a good shared understanding of it that you can sit there and talk about, well, what if Spider-Man was doing this? And you can just kind of riff on it because you know enough about it. You can kind of figure out what would happen. I try to get to that kind of level with the game I'm playing, that the world I have, I know enough about it where I can think, this is kind of how it works. It's almost like understanding the physics, the stuff underneath, the engine underneath the world. I may not know everything on the surface because I haven't discovered it yet, but I kind of understand the physics of how everything I want is going to work together and lock together so that I can pop off stuff and it will kind of make sense. I mean, plus or minus. I'm not perfect at it. I'm not going to say that I'm a super genius. I make mistakes too, but I feel like when I'm in that sweet spot, that's kind of where I feel like I am. Some people need more than that, which I get. Some people, they want to know every little piece, and that's where they get their fun. And just like with players, going back to what I said at the beginning, players and their backstories, right? Some people, like me, are good with just writing out a paragraph and saying, this is my backstory, and I'm fine with that. Other players want to write 10 pages worth of backstory. But in the same way where you as a GM get 10 pages worth of backstory and you think, I can't, this is really constrictive to everything that I want to do, because how do I integrate this and how do I integrate this when this person has this super complex story? The same rule applies to you as a GM. You're writing 50 pages of book on your world. You got to figure out how to still leave spaces in there to make stuff happen. Because you end up just locking things down that you end up just trying. I mean, if you think about it, trying to come up with just it wasn't even this GM wasn't looking for like the big boss or something. He was just looking for, hey, well, they're going to be in this kind of dungeon-like space. And I want to throw a boss at them. This should be an easy question. Instead, he's racking his brain about it. It's become something he's going on Reddit and going back and forth with people like me over for something that really should be just something simple. And it's no longer simple because of all this other stuff. So clearly that stuff is no longer a benefit. Now it's a hindrance. And maybe that's really the bottom line of all this. Your world building, once you see it drifting from being a benefit to you, that it's helping you, and then you're starting to have ideas, and you got to go, no, but, can't do that, because then you really want to rethink what you're doing. And the things I talked about should help you, give you those spaces to allow that to happen, because really the world building, it's supposed to be an aid to playing the game. It's not the be all end all of the game. Like I said about players and their backstories, if your character's mission is just to fulfill your backstory, I think that's a poor backstory. Your character's mission should be to do stuff in the game, and how you play your character, how that stuff relates to you, is how your backstory turns out. Same thing for your world building. The players aren't here to experience your lore. The lore is here to enrich their experience of playing the game. So try a couple of these things, right? Try to make sure that you're not locking anything in stone until it's come out the table. Avoid absolutes. Don't talk about this can never or this can always. Even if stuff's come out the table, feel free to be writing in pencil and to amend things, update them, and then chalk it up to just, communication issues, transmission issues of information, why things are incorrect. And then leave spaces open in your world building for you to fill in, for your players to fill in, for serendipity to fill in, for random rolls and just things to come out to fill in. And then lastly, if there's just an overall tip, be flexible. And if you ever find your world building starting to hinder your ability to run the game, then it's time to start rethinking that lore and that world building and making it, turning it, crafting it, sculpting it, grinding it down to make it back into what it should be, which is a support, a benefit, a gameplay helper, aid, and not an obstacle, a hindrance to playing the game. That's all I got for now. If you enjoy these videos, please, give me the thumbs up. There's that alarm bell thing you can ring if you want to be notified. Subscribe if you feel that way. I have a Patreon and other things. The links are in there if you want to help me out that way. But otherwise, have a great rest of your day whenever you're watching or listening to this, and I'll talk to you later.